I'm now just going to take a moment to introduce you to our host and facilitator, Chantal Phillips, who is, in addition to being a research assistant at YouthREX, is a medical student at the University of Toronto. Chantal's research and advocacy interests include addressing oppression with a specific focus on harm reduction, anti-Black racism in academic, political, and health-based contexts. In addition to her work with YouthREX, she is also project manager of the Black COVID Resilience Health Promotion Project with Black Health Alliance. So I'm going to ask Chantal to join us, and Chantal, you can take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you for attending this online screening of the Zeta Project and a related conversation on creating healing spaces for young Black men. Before I introduce one of the two filmmakers who is here today, we would just like to emphasize that both this film and this conversation will likely produce a variety of feelings and thoughts, some uncomfortable. An important distinction that each person will have to make for themselves is whether that discomfort is healthy or harmful. In a pre-conversation with one of the panelists who you'll be introduced to later, Asante, he beautifully stated that what can be triggering for some white people at times is actually what might be needed for his own relief as a Black man. So Black folks, Black men may have experiences in their everyday lives that they cannot choose to ignore. And so a conversation like this that releases the truth in those feelings can be healing. For some people, sometimes non-Black people, there may be more privilege in ignoring how anti-Black racism and other forms of structural oppression impact the mental health, wellness, and well-being of people in their daily lives. So in that case, this conversation might make you uncomfortable, but lean into those feelings if they are uncovering what you may frequently be ignoring. But if you find yourself not being able to hear or bear the weight of that reflection, and there's no shame in that, of course, we do have a list of resources that we can send to you and that you can hopefully access. With that being said, I will now introduce one of the two filmmakers who is with us today, Eben Odonkor. Eben, born in Oslo, Norway, grew up in Accra, Ghana, and moved to Canada to attend the University of Windsor. Upon graduation, Eben went on to write and co-direct the short drama film, The Zeta Project. This film is his directorial debut and inaugural production post-graduation, after working as a crew member on several shorts in college. His main career goal is to direct feature films and bring light to many untold stories. Welcome, Eben. So we will have some time to discuss how you dreamed up this film after this screening. But before we show the film, I was wondering if you could give a brief description of what the film showcases. You can just unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. So thank you for having me, everyone. And so briefly, the film introduces a character of someone who is deeply struggling with internal thoughts and has not yet recognized what those struggles are. So trying to express it to a friend, trying to express it to himself, really trying to understand what exactly is going through his head. So basically, we're trying to bring that sort of feeling to light, to like a visual light. And in a nutshell, that is exactly what we try to do with this film. So it's a short film on mental health and awareness amongst Black men.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that context. So without further ado, I think we're ready to screen the film now. Just a heads up, there may be slight glitches. So if you would prefer to watch the film on your own browser, I think Katie should be able to share the link to the YouTube video in the chat. Oh, perfect. Katie just shared that.
Why do you still have that bum-ass projector in 2019?
Honestly, babe, even if I told you, you wouldn't believe me.
Yeah? Try me.
Babe, what would you do without me?
Boy, you play too much.
Have you ever felt trapped in a place where you don't belong? And you feel trapped and you just can't get out?
Everyone thinks you're special, somehow different from the billions of people who have walked this earth. The insignificance of your existence is actually the reason you matter. That's a lie. But the beauty of it all is, you look at me puzzled, and I look at myself the same way.
Is that how you feel? So what do you do for fun then?
I don't have fun.
So what do you do?
I run. I run when I'm scared. I run basically to survive.
That could be fun.
Fun? I guess it could be fun. But you name it, I run from everything. Yeah, I feel conflicted all the time. Let me explain. My body feels and looks like it's at peace, but in my mind, all I want to do is run. You know, I want to do so much at one time. I feel like I can change the world. I know things. I'm the X factor. But instead, I yarn, I cry, I kick, I scream. But reality is cruel and unforgiving. I want to feel, but my brain's on autopilot. I feel like sometimes my brain has other things to worry about than this mundane, repetitive existence. It's like as if my body and my mind are on two different paths.
Suicidal.
Babe. 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 Babe.
We sometimes tend to project our fears heavily onto ourselves, which drives us to run from all our desires and mostly our human needs. But you need to understand that you deserve to be happy. And that day will come. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. You never know. Bro, but this life is a war. But you gotta remember, you got people that got your back, like, till the end. You're never alone. Don't forget that. And this fight, this battle, will be won. Believe that.
I cry myself to sleep, yeah. But it's okay to cry, look. It's okay to feel lost inside, man. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel numb inside, man. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel sad inside, man. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel numb inside, but most nights I wanna be alone. Alone, 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 no. Alone, 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 no. Alone, 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 no, no, no. Most nights I wanna be alone. Look, when I was inside and it was dark and I was down for months. Whoa, I just can't feel myself no more. I can't even tell where I'm at no more. Sometimes I think I'll be losing it, that I'm gone. Every time I think about death, I drown. You see a friend progress while you stop. It's a different gist from the clown, you for that. But it's your own lane, not a challenge. And you should wake up from balance.
Most times I want to be alone. I cry my little self to sleep. Most times I want to be alone. I cry my little self to sleep. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel lost inside. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel sad inside.
I've watched that film at least 3 to 4 times now, and it's always as impactful as the last. And even, every time I watch it, I notice something that I missed. For example, like this was the first time I noticed that the main character is wearing a purple rubber bracelet that says mental health on it while still experiencing and having like suicidal thoughts. So it's just interesting small details that have been incorporated into this film that I find so brilliant. So for those of you who have watched this for the first time, and even for those of you who might have seen it already, we think it's important to reflect on how you're feeling and processing what you just watched. So to do this, we have an activity on a platform called Mentimeter. So I'll just pull this up on my screen and I'll share the link with you all. So I just put the link in the chat so you can access the platform. But the question is, or the prompt is, share one word that describes how you feel after watching this film. Moved, reflective, anxious, heavy, thoughtful, emotional. I think someone was saying heavy again, educated, hurt, sad, powerful, empathetic, aware, powerful, supportive, touched, saddened, introspective, motivated. And also, and the child was saying powerful, mind blown. Give maybe 10 to 15 more seconds for people to share their thoughts. There's realism, deep, impressed, enlightened, inadequate, praise. Yeah, so like I think something that's really important about this is to see that even though there is a theme throughout some of these feelings between being moved and saddened, and in this space of self-reflection, like we're all in a different place at this time. So please just be aware of where you're at right now. And if this film was triggering for you in any particular way, you can message Katie, or you can even message the YouthREX link, and there's a list of resources available. But please make sure that you're aware throughout the rest of this conversation about like where you're at, where you're situated. So thank you everyone for participating in that activity. But I now have a few questions for you, Eben, starting with what led you to want to capture this type of story in your film?
Okay, so just a short backstory to what even inspired me to start something like this was having a friend, one of my closest friends here in Canada, and he was going through some struggles that I really did not understand. Like as a mortal being, trying to wrap my head around like things that he used to do, things that he would say on a daily basis when he was going through these episodes. So just from me not really understanding what he was going through, from the face of it, and seeing him really struggle, really these kinds of episodes really affect his life was heartbreaking. So after a couple of episodes and a couple of struggles that he had to go through and come out, and all of that just moved me to write something that will reflect not entirely him, but that will also reflect other people's struggles, and it even led me to believe that there's so many things that are going on with people that because we don't see on social media or because we don't see on a day-to-day basis, that doesn't really mean that it's not happening. So just to start a conversation between primarily Black people, and also realizing that amongst Black people, we don't really talk about mental health. And even if we do, it's not as available, it's not as accessible as other things on social media, because primarily that is where we get a bulk of our information. So why don't we see conversation? Why isn't it normal? Why is it like a taboo? If someone is going through like a mental struggle, why is it always spiritual? It's like someone is going through a mental struggle and they have to go to church. There's no therapist, there's no, I mean, there are resources, but like I'm saying, it wasn't accessible on social media. It wasn't loud. It wasn't available for people to know that this is something normal you can talk about. You don't need to hide. You don't need to only tackle it from the spiritual point of view. So I was just moved to write something and just try to reflect some of the things that I saw, some of the things that I did not understand. And that's just the bulk of it.
Thank you for that, Eben. And I think the fact that you experienced that and that's what informed your development of this film is what makes it so powerful. Not stating that people who haven't personally gone through a situation or a psychosis or a crisis or have witnessed it firsthand can't develop art about it, but I think having your informed perspective be what is like at the crux of the film, it hits different. Like, I think it's just really valuable to be able to see that and to encourage other people who might be going through a similar experience to just have that space. So thank you for that. And I think we have time for one more question before we introduce the additional guests or panelists. So this is something we talked about when we first met, but the title, the Zeta Project, like where did that come from? What's the significance of that title?
So I was looking for different names. I didn't want it to be too conventional, and because it was primarily about a black man, I wanted something that reflected the Black culture, like a name that reflected that. I was looking at different names that represented hope in the African language, and I found Zeta, and some languages in Africa had a common meaning for Zeta. Some had it to be trustful, some had it to be just trust, some had it to be hope, and even it can also be found primarily in the Greek language as well. So Zeta means hope in the context that I took it. So the project that I added to the name and we agreed on was to have something that is ongoing, something that is not necessarily complete. So like the Hope Project, that something we can keep moving on with it.
Yeah, and to see that you don't just ever really get to a point of like mental fullness or healing. Like, healing is a journey. So I like that you incorporated that concept into the title. And just to mention something that I think was asked in the chat. So if you have questions, we can just post them in the chat, and then we can work to incorporate them throughout the conversation. But there's also a designated 20 minutes at the end where there's more opportunity for Q&A. But if you just put them in the chat as they arise, we'll be able to like keep track of them, and then we can pose them to all of the panelists. Perfect. So now we're just going to transition introducing the additional guests, Paul Bailey and Asante Houghton. So Paul is a strategist, urban planner, and interim executive director at the Black Health Alliance. Paul has spent the last decade working with youth and designing interventions focused on health and well-being, community violence, mental health and addictions, and the social service sector. His work is currently focused on social development, health equity, and addressing the causes of neighborhood distress and inequality. Thank you for being here, Paul. And Asante is a peer development and training manager at Stella's Place. He has emerged as a leader in mental health, A veteran of the speaker circuit, Asante has presented across the globe, including a pair of TEDx talks telling stories detailing the impact of family trauma on mental health. Having firmly entrenched himself in the mental health space at large, Asante is now devoting his time, energy, and focus to the intersections of race and mental health, seeking to amplify the myriad of experiences of Blackness across the diaspora in order to shed light on the ways in which being Black in a world that seeks to diminish Blackness impacts the mental health of Black people. So as you guys can see, we have a trifecta of skillfulness and Black excellence on this panel here today. And for myself, it is an honor to be a part of this conversation. In terms of format, like we said, there is some designated time for the Q&A at the end for audience questions can be posed, but we also have some questions that were previously developed, and we're going to spend about 40 minutes answering those. And so we can still try to incorporate audience questions as they come up, but we'll focus on the preset questions to begin. So let's just jump right in. So I know we had an activity to ask everyone to have like a one word that they would use to describe how they felt about the film, but I also wanted to ask you as panelists, as, you know, film as a medium has a real power to evoke feeling. And so what did you feel while watching this film and what came to mind for you? We can start with Paul.
Thank you, Chantel. Happy to be here. Thank you for organizing along with YouthREX. So my word was anxious. I don't know. As I watched the progression of the film, it was just a feeling that I had inside. There's so much. It's, mind you, so Eben, beautifully shot film, beautifully shot and directed film, because there's so much symbolism in the film that as I'm watching through, this is my third time watching, and I think I watched more intently this time, and I'm seeing, like you said, Chantal, like a whole bunch of different pieces that I didn't see and recognize in the same kind of way. But the running scene, for example, made me think, it's crucial. I think sometimes we talk about mental health when we're in the point of distress and crisis, when really, we should also be having a conversation about how we like we stay active and like we stay physical in good physical health, how we stay in good, mental health, and what are those kinds of different things. The other symbol or piece that I got from the film was, this idea of spaces and people, for Black men to speak to. I think that's so critical and crucial. So it seems like a gym auditorium or some sort of auditorium where two brothers are sitting, and I think, as I'm just reflecting and just about how I feel and the issues and the conversations is I'm just realizing that it's so critical to kind of have those spaces for Black men. I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks for sharing those thoughts, Paul. I guess for Asante, was there anything that stood out for you in particular? Any feelings that came up for you?
Yeah, I definitely feel a lot of what Paul was saying. And also, thank you everyone for having us, really. My word was reflective. And, someone else wrote down heaviness, which I think was also true for me. Just watching the film, and this was actually my first time watching it because I wanted to be raw when I came here today. I would say that with a lot of the imagery and things like that, it really struck me and it took me back to some of my own experiences. With the scene where the young man was running and talking about what running does for him, it made me think back to, being in high school and what basketball did to me, or did for me, I should say, in the sense that was kind of the only place where I was able to exist without thinking about my problems or feeling down or sad or depressed or suicidal at times. So that part definitely resonated with me. being in the gym. I'm not sure if that was an intentional choice, but if it was, you know, that part really spoke to me too, in the sense that, again, growing up as someone who played a lot of sports and a lot of basketball, you know, a lot of conversations happened in the gym. And that's where like a lot of these conversations were happening. And sometimes, I mean, they wouldn't be outright mental health conversations, but more so talking about almost like on a superficial level, almost getting there, but not quite getting there kind of situation. So yeah, just a lot of the imagery really struck me. I like Paul, I thought it was a beautifully filmed and directed project. And I don't know, I loved it, man. So keep doing what you do, even. And yeah, just, you know, I think there were some powerful messages there. I think they did a really good job of going into touching upon relationships, touching upon how lonely and trapped you could feel, touching upon different things that people do to try to escape or cope, and really diving into the external and seeing how that is or in the internal and seeing how that's reflected in the external. So I'll leave it there for now, and we'll continue the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that piece around like space, making space for people. I know I'm kind of like going out of order, but I feel like it's timely just to talk a bit about what it looks like to make space. So like right at the beginning of the film, we see the main character looking like he's like reaching out for help. And like he asks his partner, have you ever felt trapped in a place where you don't belong and you feel trapped and you just can't get out? And I know you both referenced that. So like, in your opinion, what are some ways that Black men desiring support can reach out? We don't necessarily see what happened before that conversation in the gym, like how do they both get there? But what does it look like for Black men desiring support to reach out? I don't know if you want to start with that, Paul.
Give that one to Asante first.
Sure, Asante.
Yeah, I'll catch that pass.
We're talking about ball there. You just got it. You just took that.
You know me. You know I make all kinds of sports references all the time. So anyway, you know, for me, I don't think there's an easy answer to this question. And I think sometimes when we ask these kind of questions, we want an easy answer, or something that's easy to do. The answer might be easy, but it may not be easy to do, if that makes sense. So for me, I think, you know, a lot of it really starts with being able to like identify and think about like who really is in your circle, who has your back. And sometimes that's it's hard to identify, because, you know, there's some, like, speaking for myself, I mean, growing up, it was like, yeah, I played basketball and I was on the team, but it's like, who on that team were like, who was I really tight with, or who were just teammates? Or, you know, as I got older, I was going clubbing all the time. Who was I going out with, and that's all we did together? Or who are the people I was, you know, like chopping it up with, like on a regular basis, right? So really, like, identifying who are those people who you can trust, and then breaking that barrier of actually having the conversation about what's really going on for you. Or maybe a friend that you both know, you notice like, hey, yo, I noticed AB and, you know, whoever, you know, they've been a little bit different lately. Yo, do we need to reach out to him, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But because of all of the ways that we want to protect ourselves, it can make it difficult to breach that conversation and start. So for me, I mean, there's a lot of bravery, probably a huge amount of bravery that comes into play in having that conversation and really breaking down that first barrier, which is to actually just have the conversation.
Yeah, and I think to answer the question as well, it's part of this is I think it's important. So part of the reason why I think it's important to be in tune and to protect your mental health is so that you can lay that groundwork or laying that groundwork is part of, you know, what Asante is talking about, making sure that you have those people and those spaces that can help you notice if you're not noticing, that, you know, something is off and that you need to, you know, check in. The other thing that I think is, you know, spaces look different for many different people. I'm a really stubborn individual. I don't like public sharing. I don't like circles. I don't even like things like this. But I'm just being straight. But you know, I've had to really push myself to be more open and to start small and to and purposely create space and create relationships, even if they're loose, so that I can check in and that there's a you know, that there's a space. And so, you know, long story short, I think I'm much more intentional about trying to cultivate my own spaces and my own conversations, and you know, even though it is uncomfortable, broaching questions. You know, I don't know. It was interesting. I one of my neighbors, we grew up with friends. Brethren went away and he came back. We recently just had a conversation, just sat down outside. It was cold, and we just started to check in with each other, and it was amazing. You know, it was like no time had passed. We just were able to kind of just like go in and go deep about, you know, the past couple of years, and you know, different feelings, different occurrences, and I think, like, for me, like, even that space to have a conversation, to reconcile old issues was good and healing.
Can I jump on that real quick? You know, what I like what you said there, Paul, is about being intentional. You know what I mean? And I like that because, well, I mean, that resonates with me because, you know, like where I am now in life, where I talk about this all the time, and I mean, I'm in these spaces, you know, a lot in terms of like circles and them kind of thing. But, you know, it didn't start that way. You know, there was a point in my life where it was like, I felt like I started getting better, and I was like, okay, let me just forget everything that was bad in terms of depression, anxiety, suicidality. That didn't exist no more. But I realized that wasn't working for me in a variety of different ways. So then, you know, it was like a piece of myself was cut off if I wasn't, you know, at least even internally accessing, you know, those parts of my life from my story. So then for me, I'm a person that needs to get things out in some kind of way in order to process it. So then that's when I started making that intentional space in my own life, because I realized that it just felt like I had a weight on me all the time when I was keeping it inside.
And like, I think that piece, it transitions nicely into this question I'm going to ask to Eben, and it's depicted in the film around like that quotation, I run when I'm scared, I run basically to survive, you name it, I run from everything. And there's a part of us that like we run from ourselves, we run from the things we've experienced. So like that quote really stood out to me, and it made me wonder what barriers exist, internal and external, that make some Black men want to run away from instead of running towards healing.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, just to even touch on what Asante said, finding like a support system, having someone to talk to can be really helpful, because like when you're in your thoughts like that, in reference to what I wrote in terms of running from thoughts, running from everything. Some people run physically, like just to get away from their thoughts, and some people run from their struggles mentally, run from having to face those things, having to come to terms with it, having to question themselves on some things. So basically that quote was to sort of signify that two sides to the story, that two ways of looking at things. Some people try to get away from those thoughts that will lead them to depression or suicide. Some people also run physically to get away from those things. So that's kind of like a play on that idea.
Mm-hmm. And like that concept of, I guess, running as a form of coping, whether we want to say that it's healthy or unhealthy coping, I guess open to both Paul and Asante, like what barriers exist that make it more likely or make men want to run away? Like why does that become the response?
You know, I don't know if I can speak on behalf of all men.
Of course.
Uh, uh, um, and I'm trying to figure out if what I do is running, or if it's another kind of coping mechanism. Because I think, as Asante said earlier, it's like, yo, to open up yourself and expose yourself. So you know it's the, you're we grew up in a society where we're encouraged, I think specifically for Black men, encouraged to be the quote unquote patriarchal man, right? So strong, you know, protector, security, provider. um and so, you know, to so if you grow up and you really internalize all those pieces, like as part of your identity, part of who you are, and then you're asked to open up about, you know, how you know, some of those things may be some of the you know, the cracks in that facade might be, you know, some of the things that kind of raise to the surface some issues of distress for you. And so I'm saying, you know, having to be open about those kinds of things, it's almost like cognitive dissonance. How do you do that when, like, this is so much of how, you know, you identify and you are seen, or you want to be seen. And so I think some of how we raise boys and support men, um you know, s- s- some of the if we're not intentional about creating spaces where people can actually, like, break down that facade and build it back up so that they can go outside and survive the world. I think, you know, those are some of the barriers. It's you know, I don't have a perfect, you know, analogy, but I think sometimes we assume that, like, it's okay to just break down those barriers, or like break down those masks and break down that armor that people pull up. But the armor's there often for a reason, right? It's there so that you can walk through the world. And so you do need those spaces where, and people where you can kind of break down that armor, but those people who can also build you back up so that you're ready to take on the world when you go back outside. But yeah, for me, I think some of how we raise and don't create spaces is part of those barriers.
Yeah, you know, I agree with pretty much all of that. I think that there are a lot of expectations heaped upon men, around, you know, what masculinity looks like, and I think for Black men that is amplified, you know, tenfold. You know, I think in a lot of ways, you know, in society, there, you know, Black men have to hold the mantle of, like, the highest level of masculinity all the time. Um, you know, and we could go into some very deep conversations about that. But with respect to what we're talking about now, you know, I think that's one of the barriers, and I think sometimes what we do is we place the responsibility on the individual. Like, why aren't you talking if you're struggling? But I think what we need to also understand is that society doesn't just condition us to think this way, but treats us in a way that this is what works and being different doesn't work, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, thinking about the community in which I grew up in, you know, in terms of just like having respect from my peers and being, and, you know, where I grew up, like, respect was also safety, right? It was necessary for me to even try to put in the armor. Like, I'm not some super hard dude, and, like, I can't even pretend to be, you know what I mean? But I was trying, right? Because that was protection for me, like, in my social context. You know, then I think about things like, you know, dating and relationships and all of these pieces, you know, and then, you know, as you get older, you know, parenthood and providing for a family, all of these things where you're told that you have to be strong all the time. And our conception of strength is to be, you know, unemotional and stoic and those kind of things, right? Which, you know, is contradictory to, you know, sharing your feelings and emotions and those kind of things, right? So I mean, even in doing those things, like sharing, opening up, there's often a sense of shame that's attached to it, because it's like, yo, like, I'm not supposed to be doing this. Like, am I a punk? Like, what am I doing right now? because we internalize those messages about, the only way to be masculine is this, wear the armor all the time, to take your language, Paul. So I think that's a big barrier. So I mean, again, we put a lot of onus on individuals, but I think also as a society and across different cultures, we need to start being more inclusive of having, the emotional world of men, and not just men, but, all of us, like men, women, everyone really, especially as Black folks, to, integrate that part of us into our wholeness, so that when someone is breaking down or someone comes to you with a problem or whatever, there's not judgment as the first response. The first response is compassion instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so well said, to all of you. And I think that piece you said about like seeking wholeness, do you think there's a difference between like seeking mental health and healing? Because when I think of the word wholeness, as you stated it, I tend to think more about healing than just about mental health. So if there is a difference between those two, like what does healing look like? If you want to respond, Asante.
I think healing and mental health they overlap very strongly. I don't really think, mental health in terms of like improving your mental health can happen without healing. The reality is that the large majority of us that struggle or have struggled with any kind of mental health challenge, whether for a short amount of time or a long amount of time, there were factors involved in that journey that, hurt us, or maybe there was trauma, or maybe there was abuse, or, there, or poverty, or circumstances, discrimination, work stress, something that, has chipped away at a part of us, and left us with a wound that needed to be healed. Of course, how we approach that healing can sometimes, sometimes we need support in terms of, how we do that, whether it's support from other people or support in terms of, understanding how like our habits impact us and things of that nature. But I definitely see a very strong overlap between mental health and healing. And as I grow older and I talk about this subject more and more and more, I want to shift the conversation more toward talking about healing, especially through the context of being a Black person, and just historical traumas, and not just mental health, where which I think sometimes silos the conversation into meditation and yoga and drinking smoothies. Not saying that stuff is bad, but I mean, really, a person is a whole being. So you can't just treat a piece of the person and expect them to be okay. You have to, look at the whole being.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Paul, do you have any thoughts? Do you agree? Anything to add? You're muted.
No, I was saying I think Asante said that well. Nothing to add.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And we touched upon this a little bit earlier, around what it even means to have something be like a healthy or an unhealthy form of coping, and whether it be running or that armor that we put up, and that armor being, I think, useful as we are going through life, but also sometimes it can be harmful depending on what it prevents us from being able to do and how it prevents us from being able to engage with support. So I guess, how would you determine like what is a healthy or an unhealthy form of coping? And I know, Asante, you have that training with Stella's Place where we talked a bit about that. So I was wondering if you could educate us on your thoughts around that.
I don't know if education is the right word, but I'll
drop some wisdom.
For me, I don't like to look at any particular behavior or habit in a vacuum as this is an unhealthy way to cope and that is a healthy way to cope. I think it's really individualized in terms of what is the impact a particular behavior or habit or coping mechanism is having on you, your life, your family, your relationships, that kind of thing. in the film when the young man, I guess the person in the therapist role or the peer support role asked you know, are you having fun? And then, you know, we got that flash to, you know, the guy was, you know, in the car and he's smoking and he's drinking and these kind of things. You know, a lot of people will look down on that kind of thing and say, yo, you shouldn't be smoking weed or you shouldn't be drinking. And I mean, of course, there are, you know, health impacts to those kinds of things. But, you know, I have a friend of mine who said that the only way that he survived his high school years was smoking weed every day, right? And then once things improved for him, he just ditched the habit completely. But that was what got him through that period of his life, right? But there are other people I know that I knew in high school who I saw start smoking weed in grade 9, and, you know, brilliant minds became people who, you know, dropped out of school and went a different way because, you know, weed escalated into other things. So I think it's really individual, and, you know, all of us, you know, we have to think about our habits, our vices, all of these different things, whether they be substances or something else, because coping isn't just, you know, substances. It could look like a variety of different things. It could look like spending too much time on the internet and social media, or, you know, video games, or, you know, promiscuity, jumping from relationship to relationship, which was something that I did, you know, trying to cope back in the day. So it could look like a variety of different things. You know, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'm going to end quick. Using the relationship thing, like, I didn't realize that was like a coping mechanism for me for a long time. But once I did, I realized I had to stop this because, I mean, it was impacting me negatively and obviously impacting, you know, these young women that I was with one for 6 months and next one for the next. It wasn't helpful to anybody. I was just creating a lot of damage and bad karma. So, you know, I had to take a step back and think about what can I do differently to fill myself up, because I was looking at them to fill a void that I had inside of myself, right? So I was like, how can I heal, to go back to the previous question, on my own without relying on, you know, someone else to do that for me? I'm not sure if I answered the question properly.
No, more than enough. Thank you for sharing that personal experience and like that example, because sometimes it takes an example for people to really like wrap their heads around what that looks like. Paul, I saw you unmute, so I don't know if you have something to add.
Asante ended up covering it, but I was going to ask him another follow-up question, which was, you know, how do you know when you're self-medicating versus, you know, just know that you know, you maybe have a habit and that's something different? How do you differentiate between, you know, this is a coping mechanism and you know, just you know, just like weed, I don't know.
That's a good question. I think you just have to take a real honest look at the impact that it's having on your life. You know, some people come home and, you know, drink a beer or, you know, a wine or something like that and feel like, okay, this is helping me relax. But, you know, is it also sending you to sleep on the couch and then you're not getting good sleep? And that's impacting, you know, how you wake up the next day, and do you feel groggy? And then, you know, is that impacting your eating habits? And are you eating badly now because, you know, this other substance is impacting your energy level or whatever it is? You know, but there are other people who need that glass of wine at the end of the day. You know, for them that's relaxing, and it helps them to, you know, to center themselves. So I think it's a lot of this is about self-awareness and self-reflection and looking at the impacts it has on you, but also the impacts it has on your family relationships. Because maybe that glass of wine is good for you, but, you know, it takes you away from your son or your daughter or your spouse, because it puts you in a kind of zone where you're away from everything and it's impacting your family back. So it's really about looking at the impacts, I think, on health and relationships and those pieces.
You know, there's, because part of how I think about it for myself is trying to have a sense of where I'm grounded and how I am grounded. And I'm like, obviously that's going to look different for everybody. And so when I don't feel grounded or I feel like myself, and then I'm moving into, unhealthy habits that I won't name, for me, that's the sign that, like, okay, like I need to flip something. Like, what's happening? Am I working too hard? Is something else? That's how I kind of ground and check myself. But I was curious as to what you thought and what others might be doing.
Hmm. So I guess based on just observing and taking in what has been said, I think first of all, it's subjective, the ability to differentiate what could be, I'll put in air quotes, unhealthy and healthy. But it also has to do with, when reflecting on that impact, like how is it impacting the other areas of your life, your ability to be grounded and access the supports that you need to make sure that the other areas of your life are also in check. And I think that form of coping, it could even make it more challenging to access the supports that you need. Asante, you were saying how a particular substance or behavior might take you away from your family, but if your family is what typically helps to ground you in the midst of crises, then this coping habit or behavior is preventing you from accessing the supports that typically would ground you. So I think considering what is the cost, or like what are you at risk of losing because of a particular coping mechanism, I think is helpful. Do you have anything to add to that, Eben?
Right. I'm definitely learning a lot from these guys, Paul and Asante, and I think one other sort of question will be, so we find in terms of finding solace in someone, having to trust someone to talk to as an alternative to sort of a therapist, because in my personal experience, what I find is having a trustworthy person to talk to, rather than going to like a professional who's digging to find something, find a particular phrase or something that you say where they can counter with an advice from their professional experience. So what I personally find is having trust in someone who's close to you, and also having to talk to them when you're going through something. I think that's, in my opinion, that can be like a better alternative to coping with things. So just a question to throw out there. So in terms of finding like someone to talk to or finding like professional help, what would be the best method to sort of like offload your thoughts when these things start running in your mind?
Paul, Asante, have any thoughts in response to that?
That sounds like a trained professional question.
I was about to throw that to you, man. What do you mean?
You give it a go, and then I have some thoughts.
I always find that a difficult question to answer, because I think there's an assumption that, might be partly right, but I think in many ways now it's becoming more and more wrong, that Black people don't want to go seek professional help. It's just, what professional help do we want to seek, and from who? And a lot of the mainstream sources for professional help, lead us to people who don't look like us and who don't have our stories or understand our stories, which makes it really difficult to access things like therapy. I've someone I know, a Black man who tried to access therapy a few months ago during the pandemic, and he had to stop after 2 sessions with a therapist because the therapist said something racist to him that the therapist didn't even realize was racist, even after my friend confronted him about it and tried to like break it down. So incidents like that, I think, highlight how challenging it could be, and how to access mental health services as a Black person, or as a non-white person. And it's you want to go to these spaces or these professionals for safety, but you can't always trust that you're going to feel safe. One of the things that I think needs to happen on a more mainstream level, and I know some of these, what I'm about to mention, some of these networks are starting to develop, are listings or a hub where we can say, this is where you go if you are a Black person, or maybe you're a South Asian person, or Asian, or Indigenous, or what have you, to access mental health from someone from your culture. So again, these things aren't necessarily widely known, but they do exist. And I mean, I could give a lot of advice in terms of how to find these people, but I mean, honestly, Google is your best friend. Social media also has been incredibly helpful. There have been times where I've gone on Twitter and I said, does anyone know resources for Black youth, blah, 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 and then people start shooting resources at me. So I think that can be helpful as well, because then you're going to get that's like the online Yelp review. People aren't going to refer you to things that they don't like or haven't accessed before. So.
Yeah, I agree. And my thought was always that there is no, I came to this work thinking that this was like a well-oiled machine, that there was a structure and a thing in place for folks to access services that, healthcare, free healthcare, or universal healthcare meant, sorry for the landline in the background, universal healthcare meant that folks, would have access to services. And so what a lot of the work that we're focused on at Black Health Alliance is, how do we expand culturally safe, culturally appropriate care for Black children, youth, and their families? Because I came to realize that a lot of those spaces, professional spaces, don't exist. I think we're all going through different things at various different levels, and it might be the impact of gun violence, it might be your own personal issues happening inside your house, or it might be something really personal and deep to you. And I think some things likely require, I think, maybe a more professional help and professional hand, and like Asante is saying, I think where I've tended to find the most success for the people who have reached out to me for services is those networks, is those unvarnished, like, who are the actual people that have helped XYZ people through XYZs. There are also a number of organizations out there that are doing some of this work. So SAPAC, based at CAMH, Roots Community Services out in Peel, CAFCAN out in North York, Tropicana / Taibu out in Malvern. Sometimes those aren't the final place where you get the exact service that you need, but can be a good starting place to reach out to get support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for posing that question, Eben, and thank you for such thoughtful answers. I also don't want to take too much space as a Black woman, but I've accessed therapy before, and I think it's important to recognize that there's going to be times you just don't mesh or vibe with the counselor. And in those moments, that doesn't mean that counseling or therapy doesn't work. It just means that you don't vibe with that person. And so I think that concept of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there's value in being able to differentiate between therapy and therapist, but I also agree that some people just don't have access to those types of resources and are not able to access those types of resources. And it's a privilege to have the funds to be able to do that. So some people don't have the ability to jump between different therapists. So I recognize that as a barrier. That's why I appreciate your question, Eben. I think it's really important. So in the last about 20 minutes or so that we have some questions from the audience, and some of them might be that are quite specific, but I think there's still value in posing them and see if there's the ability to answer them. So I think starting with, what are some authentic ways of building holistic allyship with Black youth and their families in clinical counseling and community settings for non-Black service providers? I'll put it in the chat so you can read it. Yeah, I saw the gears turning, Paul.
You know, I'm not a clinician, and I don't do youth work in that way anymore. But I think two things come to mind just for me as a regular person is I think so often people feel they know what young people or youth, Black youth included, need, and don't create the space for them to voice what they need to voice, whether that's through actual words or through, you know, other means and other mechanisms. It might be art, it might be, you know, it might be sitting in a room and not saying anything for the first 5 sessions, but creating the space for that listening ear. Second is, you know, I honestly just struggle with this personally. Is should as an organization, should we be pushing for more Black people in community-based care to deliver services for young people? Because I sometimes I just genuinely wonder whether or not you can train and coach people and kind of get rid of some of those like ingrained biases and that ingrained racism and other isms in folks. And so I don't know. I honestly struggle with that part of the question. But again, I think if folks take the time to be self-aware, are true and authentic as to kind of where they are be able to acknowledge when they've made a mistake, and focus on creating and cultivating the type of space that young people are asking for. I think, you know, sometimes that's the extent to which, you know, it makes a difference between, you know, the folks who aren't willing to take a step in a different direction or do something different in their practice. So, you know, I guess to just wrap that up for me is it's I think really intently listening to what young people want and creating and cultivating a space for that.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I too am now struggling with the question of what, you know, the ramifications of inclusion versus, you know, the benefits of spaces that are by and for the people in those spaces. But with regard to inclusion, you know, I think, well, I mean, the first thing I'll say is, you know, if you are a not Black person and you're working with Black people, they don't need to trust you. Like they're not obligated to trust you. You know, and you know, any distrust that we may have is not something that we were taught or conditioned, you know, theoretically. It was derived from personal experience or historical experience or community experience, which is to say that racism has, you know, made us mistrust a lot of people who have hurt us and put barriers in front of us and not made space for us and those kind of things. So there is no obligation for us to, you know, walk into your space and, you know, just open up to anybody. So let's dead that first of all. You know, but what I'll say after that is that there are a lot of overt ways and also many covert ways that non-Black people judge and try to shape what they, you know, or it's almost a subtle wanting us to transform into what is deemed to be comfortable for others in order for us to be in a space. And that's why we don't want to be in the space, is because we don't want to make that transformation, and we don't want to feel all of the just, you know, nasty things that you feel when people want you to do that. So, I mean, a big thing for me is just kind of, you know, stepping out of the way and providing space for people to be themselves and not to be performative, either in, you know, socially progressive liberal sense, but also not to be performative in the sense of trying to build solidarity by, engaging in things that you might think would connect with Black people stereotypically. Like all of a sudden you start speaking to me differently and, giving me your fist bumps and all of this stuff. And you don't do that with your friends. Come on, man. So like we read that stuff and we're like, okay, this person sees, because when you do that, what you're doing is telling me you see me as different. You don't see me as a human. You're seeing me as different. And regardless of whether that difference is, in your mind is positive or whatever, the way I'm reading it is that you're not seeing me with the same kind of humanity that you are seeing others that look like you. So then, I mean, I have no reason to trust you at that point. So a big piece of it, and I don't, I'm just reading the comment now. I don't think it's only white therapists who are guilty of this. That's why I say non-Black. Sometimes you even have Black folks in the profession who are guilty of this kind of stuff, right? So, and really that's because of, the system is very Eurocentric in terms of how it's designed and teaches us to think and operate. But that's a next conversation. But Paul, go ahead, man. I see you come off mute.
I saw another question in the chat, really, which was around like how to get young male clients, for example, to open up to female caseworkers. And I think you're speaking to that already, that there isn't an inbuilt, for some young people it's going to be right, and for some young people it's going to be wrong. And I think there are structural things that we can do. So like when I look at a quote unquote mainstream organization, and when I see like 95% of the staff complement is white women, I don't understand how you intend to serve a city like a city that's as diverse as Toronto with that type of staffing. I think it should be understood that sometimes for a young woman, a male counselor may not be the right fit for a young male client. Vice versa. Like it might not be a good fit. That we think really about, folks' needs, whether it be sexual identity or gender expression, or how racism impacts their life, and really figure out how we kind of tailor and build services to meet those specific needs. But yeah, nicely stated, Asante.
See, based on some of the comments in the chat, people, this is just dropping gems everywhere. Thank you. Thank you for your service. This is very helpful. There's a couple other questions. We have quite a few. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them in the next 10 minutes. One of them came up twice, actually, so I'll just ask it to Eben. If someone asked how you found funding to produce your film, and was it out of pocket? Did you get a grant? How did that work?
So I produced this film with Soch, the other filmmaker. So shout out to Soch, who couldn't make it due to work, but I got your back. So it was difficult to find funding, especially in the time frame we're trying to do it. And at that time as well, we had nothing really to show from our resumes, apart from the fact that we had done some photography work or some creative work. So to dive into the film world, it was a little difficult to find funding. So we decided to go out of pocket and self-finance this film. So at least we have something to show for if we decide to do like a next project, we have something to stand on to say we can build on this. So it was all out of pocket from me and such. Yeah.
So I don't know who's watching out of the 72 participants, but clearly there's talent here. So if you have a grant available, please share that information in the chat. If you are interested in the development of these types of this type of art, please get in touch with Eben. It's always helpful to put it out there because you have no idea who these 72 people are.
Sure.
I think there's time for maybe one more question. And I think this one is, I'll pose it, I'll put it in the chat, and then we can work with it. I'll just say that. So the question is, or the statement was, what's really hard for me to understand is why are Black men not willing to accept it, that they need therapy, informal and formal. And I do think we already kind of went into this, is that there's a trust that's connected to this. I feel like that's a lot of what we've been talking about today, but I just wanted to pose to see, is there anything that you feel we haven't touched upon in response to this question?
Just a quick one here. I think both Paul and Asante talked about this. There's a stigma about, especially where I come from in Ghana. There's a stigma about Black men being strong. Like, Black men don't cry, men don't cry. So sort of it's sort of a negative thing to, culturally speaking, sort of a negative thing to express your feelings as a man, to cry, to be able to confide in someone. So I think to be able to get rid of that stigma, and to also say it's okay to talk to somebody about something. It's okay to express your feelings. It's okay to get advice. It doesn't make you any less of a man. So stripping down that stigma will definitely help with things. But I think it's one major contributing factor.
Yeah, again, I'm no expert in this space. Well, just thinking about it, I think sometimes if we're trying something and it's not working, then we have the wrong strategy. That's just my disposition and orientation, and so sometimes, again, I think what Eben just talked about is truth. What the pieces around stigma and how people respond is truth. I also think things like generally this idea of therapy kind of I guess maybe it's the way I understand it is that formal or informal, it's in an office space, it's in a building, it's in a it's in that kind of environment. Have we thought about paintball? Mind you, I hate paintball. It's like it's anyways, that's a whole nother conversation. But have we thought about paintball or art? Like, I think the point that I made a little bit earlier around, like, being comfortable with the silence and creating space for that, like, listening ear and for that voice to express. Sometimes it's not like folks aren't going to show up in the way that we expect them to show up, but if we're listening, if we're trying to create spaces, sometimes folks will show up differently. And I think sometimes we have to realize that some folks aren't going to be able to create those spaces, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try or support or figure out the partnerships or the people that can create some of those spaces. But I think when we think about therapy and informal and formal, like, yeah, I really think, like, we should really stretch the definition of kind of where that starting point can be. Like, I think art or paintball can be the starting point for those kinds of conversations, not to choose I guess stereotypically male activity, paintball, guns, anyway.
Yeah, to jump off from what you're saying, Paul, I mean, I really believe that therapy doesn't need to happen in an office. I don't think therapy needs to be something you have to pay somebody for. I think therapy, because when we say therapy, what we really, I mean, a lot of therapy really is about relationship building, trust, and compassion, and space. A therapist's job isn't to tell you what to do. A therapist's job is to help you figure out what you need to do. And they what they do is ask you exploratory questions to help you arrive at whatever those things are yourself. Because, like that movie Inception, the idea sticks more when it germinates from you than when someone else plants it in your mind, right? So in saying that, I think a lot. They could be community spaces. I mean, for me, it was sports. For someone else, it could be dance. For someone else, it could be filmmaking. For someone else, it could be church. For whatever it is, wherever you find your healing and your community and meaning, that can be a place of therapy for you. Now, going a little bit deeper into answering the question, I think that we often want to do is, we want to force people to get the help that we think they need, in the way we think they need to get it. And that never works because the person's either not going to do it or they're going to do it, but do it with resentment. So, you know, judgment is not, it's not a good motivator for anyone to do anything of their own volition and to do it with a level of just like groundedness and acceptance of whatever the problem may be. You know, pride and shame are incredibly powerful things. And I would say that, you know, if there's anything that gets in the way for anybody, and not just Black men, but for anybody, is that feeling of pride, which wants you to protect yourself, and also shame, which again wants you to protect yourself, right? How do we diminish pride and how do we diminish shame? I think that we do that through compassion and listening and creating space and non-judgment, and for really, you know, listening to what someone is going through. You know, a recent thing that happened in my life, and I won't say too much about this because I don't want to disclose too much, is, you know, let's just say I was counseling somebody I know, and they've been struggling for a long time. And there was something that they've been holding on to for decades that they had never told nobody. And, you know, they let me know that these things were impacting them so much that they were suicidal. And you know, there are a lot of like things that I could have responded to as like personal attacks toward me or toward any of the things that I might have, you know, said to this person in the past. But I tried not to get into that power struggle, and instead said, okay, you know, you and me might see the situation differently or disagree about certain things, but I still want to hear about those things that you didn't share for 20 years to anybody, including your therapists. And then they started to disclose to me. And, you know, instead of saying, well, you need to go talk to a professional about that, it was more, you know, of a compassionate response of, you know, I can, you know, I'm sorry those things happened to you. You know, it helps me to understand better the impact of, you know, the choices you've made or the behaviors that I've seen, and things like that. And that really helped that person, you know, or at least started a conversation that might be the jumping off point for that person to, you know, make some real steps in terms of their healing. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks to all of you. And I think just for that person who posed the question as well, as even though there's so much wisdom that was shared between the three of you, I think it's seeing that it's we have to make sure that when we're asking why Black men are not willing to accept that they need therapy, it's like, what type of therapy are we pushing? What type of therapy are we prescribing? Because I think that helps to really inform how you respond and reflect on the question as well. So we're at 2:30. This flew by. Thank you so much to all of you for participating, for being so willing to share so much of your knowledge, your lived experience, and even for being willing to share your film with us. I don't know if I'm allowed to put you on blast, but your film got accepted to the Toronto Black Film Festival. So for any of y'all interested in seeing it again, you should be able to access some tickets there if you want to support. And if you have any other questions leading up to this, but also as we exit, I think there should be the opportunity to reach out to YouthREX and to get some access to those resources we mentioned earlier on, as well as to learn about some more upcoming events that we should be holding until March. I don't know if there's any final thoughts. Even, do you have any projects coming up you want to share with folks?
I just want to say thank you, and thank you to Katie, thank you Paul, and thank you Asante. Definitely nice meeting all of you. This has been very insightful. I've learned a lot. I've been able to connect with you guys. I have a project coming up this year. I think I mentioned it to you. It's called Skin Solid. Mostly about skin, Black skin, how it's perceived, and I just don't want to drop too much, so we'll get there when the time comes.
That sounds good. Give them just enough to come back. Yeah. Any thoughts from Paul? Oh,
Thanks for the work, Eben, and thank you, Chantel, for the great moderation. YouthREX and Katie Asante, I appreciate the space. I think we got to hold each other up. So thanks again.
Asante, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I echo the same thing from Paul. Just thank you for creating this space. Yourself, Chantel, and Katie, and YouthREX, and even for doing the film. Paul for joining us today. All the all the attendees, I should say, for joining us today, and the questions, all of that. I really appreciate it. If you want to get in touch with me, I mean, probably the easiest way is throw my name into Twitter, Instagram, Google, and there's a lot there. So
watch those TED Talks.
This guy
There
said,
you go.
Google me. Google
Right?
me.
That's what he said. That's really what he said. That's how I was like, best believe, go check those TED Talks on YouTube. Well, on that note, thank you so much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.